It's all good.
Here we go. Welcome to the podcast, episode 11, I think, of the Noel Casler podcast. I'm back here with my podcast EP and my main man, Jimmy Kennedy, to break down the week's events. It's been one of those weeks once again. They just get crazier and crazier, folks. We thought it was going to end with Trump, and it was just the beginning, sadly. So let's break it all down. Jimmy, how you doing today?
Doing fantastic, buddy. The GOP has gone full QAnon. They're full on into Trumpism. We were talking off air. It's like actually getting a face tattoo. You can joke about it and you can, make fun of other people, but to actually go full on like Mike Tyson and have a face tattoo, that's where the Republican Party is right now, man. Yeah.
That's a great analogy, Jimmy. It's a funny joke. Yeah, they've given up on life, like that's the face tattoo, the neck tattoo. Like, I don't need to work in corporate America again. I'm good here with the QAnon idiots. And that's where they've gone. And a video came out this morning. You remember on episode 8, we talked about Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I said, she's like a rabid dog. Like I said, I'm telling you, it's not going to end well with her. She's going to end up assaulting somebody. If you were the principal of a school, you would remove her if she was your teacher. And I know that because, like many people, like I've worked in crowds, I was part of the security not that I'm a security guard, obviously, look at my size, but a lot of what I did in live television involved security because I was with these really high profile celebrities and you're going through crowds and through events. So I worked closely with a lot of security teams up into the Secret Service, and I worked on concert tours where you would always you'd have a head of security, but you'd go out and you'd keep an eye on the audience, and Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of those people that you would cue in on right away. You would just single her out and you would know that person is going to be trouble, even as a stand-up comedian, and you can take it. You would see her at one of the tables in the front row and you'd be like, oh God, me and this lady are going to tangle tonight because she's got that unhinged look. She looks crazy and she acts crazy. And that's the scariest thing, is that she's been emboldened to the point where she's celebrated for being such a shrill kind of jackal. She's like a rabid dog who's running around trying to bite AOC's ankles as she makes her way to the congressional floor. And, we had a video that came out today, it was sort of breaking news today, and it was from 2019. It was the same day that she said Nancy Pelosi should be lynched, right? And she said, then she went to AOC's office, stuck her little like hatchet face through the mail flap and started saying like, AOC, I know you're in there. Come out, like Robert De Niro in Cape Fear. She went full on Cape Fear on AOC, come out wherever you are. It was psycho. I would call the cops if somebody did that. If you came to my apartment and did that, and she had guys there egging her on with their MAGA hats, and they were videotaping it. They were creating content of trolling, bullying with undertones of violence. And that's MAGA itself. That is the face tattoo. People don't get face tattoos because they want to fit in and look peaceful in life. You're not like, oh, this is going to look great at the church picnic on Sunday. You tattoo your face because you want to intimidate somebody. It's like Mike Tyson. You want to be scary. The Maoris did it. It's part of their culture, and it was a cool thing, but they were warriors that were doing it because it was intimidating AF, and that's what politicking has become for the GOP. It's intimidation and bullying, and it's a lot more effective than we want to admit.
Well, and our favorite American fascist, Madison Cawthorn, is one of the best examples of it. You had him beating up the tree for content. Like, that's going to make him tough. These Republicans are pro-life. Yeah, you have a Republican congressman beating up a tree with Kevlar gloves on. Like, it's ridiculous. And for Marjorie Taylor Greene to go, here's Johnny to AOC, like, it shows not only a lack of respect for the institution that she serves for, but a lack of maturity from just a human level. And you would expect more from a representative.
Absolutely. And, and Kevin McCarthy censured Justin Amash for like criticizing Trump. They went crazy on Justin for talking out against Trump, but they're not going to do anything to Marjorie Taylor Greene. They're not going to do anything to Matt Gaetz. They still let him be on the Judiciary Committee. The guy has an impending, criminal, whatever you call it, like the guy's gonna go down, one way or another. Somebody's gonna get arrested beyond Greenberg, who just accepted a plea deal last night, which means he had 33 charges against him. I think he accepted 6 charges, which means he gave somebody up, So Matt Green is the next, or Matt, whatever the hell his name is, Matt Green. They're like the same person. Matt Gaetz, but he hasn't gotten in any trouble at home. It's like, imagine if you worked in a company and you were like, yep, there's talk that I, smashed up 8 parked cars drunk, had sex with a bunch of teenage girls, and my best friend just flipped on me, who's on his way to prison. Like, you wouldn't walk into your office on Monday and still have all your responsibilities. If you even had your job, you would be on suspension. Most police, who knows with the cops these days, but most likely you would be censured in any kind of structured environment. Marjorie Taylor Greene would not be allowed to behave that way at a corporation. If you want to look at Congress as a place where all these people are employed to work on behalf of the citizens of the United States, representing each of the 50 states, which they are, and we pay their salary, then that's a place of work. Working in Congress means like coming together. They're working in concert with each other. We're paying them to go there and accomplish some stuff. You guys hash it out, each represent your interests, and then come to a conclusion and an agreement that benefits the American people. We're not paying you to go there, stalk the hallways, and stick your face into other people's mail slots and start calling them out with threats of violence. And she was doing that same Christo-fascist rap, like, I'm a mother of 3 and I resent New York's abortion laws, blah, blah, blah. That's got no place under the dome of the Capitol. You're bringing your religious beliefs in there. There's the separation of church and state is for a reason, because it allows all of us to, first of all, worship freely, because who I worship and what my religion is none of your damn business when it comes to being a civilian and a civic and paying my taxes and being represented fairly in government, right? Mm-hmm. So that should be offense number 1. They should censor her for that alone, for bringing that into the equation. But that's one of their major dog whistles to the Southern evangelicals and Northern too. They're everywhere now, but that's abortion is one of those issues. Abortion and guns, they can do anything they want to these people. They're holding their heads underwater. They're being drowned in their own swill in the name of anti-abortion and pro-gun and Second Amendment rights. But really, their rights are being stripped from them, and their future is eroding before all of our eyes, and they're cheering it on.
Well, and my frustration with conservatives is, their ideology is, we'll pull each other up by our own bootstraps, and by individual will alone, I can prevail. Like the American dream is still alive and well in their mind, which it's not. We've seen it unfold, for a majority of Americans. Unless you have access to money, it's difficult to advance yourself past whatever class you're in. But my point is, conservatives always say that they're the ones who are individually trying to advance their own interests when they don't even look internally, for everything else. They look upon, everyone else to solve their problems, and they're just going to stay comfortable within their own bubble because they don't want to have their feelings, disrupted from what they're used to. It's a frustrating concept.
Yeah, well, it's like it plays into the whole cancel culture thing, and now the big enemy is like taxes are going to get raised to pay for all this infrastructure spending. No shit. That's how you pay for stuff. That's what pays for the roads and the things that the federal government provides for its citizens. That's why we're paying taxes, so it can be spent on things that benefit and protect us all. Right. And Republicans, they play lip service to not wanting that. In reality, they want all of that. They want corporate tax cuts. They want a world where the white man has a vote that counts more than a minority or a African American, right? Mm-hmm. That's what all these voter suppression laws are about. They're about maintaining the status quo, which made a minority rule the majority. After slavery was ended, they put in laws to make sure that a white man would still have more power than blacks. in this country. That's what the Electoral College is all about. That's why they split the Dakotas in two, so they would have 4 senators.
Right.
It's about making sure the playing field is anything but level, because they can't compete on a level playing field. And it's like this whole Bob Baffert thing. The Trump was like, it's cancel culture. He drugged his horses. Apparently he'd always drugged his horses. I think they all do. I think it's one of those sports where doping is a part of it, like cycling. But the guy's clearly busted, but Fox News and Trump and all these guys were up in arms this weekend, like, it's cancel culture. No, the thing failed its drug test, just like you would fail your drug test, Trump, if you ever showed us your medical records, but you never did because you're a fucking drug addict. Sorry to curse, it gets under my skin that like people allow this insanity, and that's what, all these guys, Tom Cotton, all these GOP senators and congressmen, your Jim Jordans who come from these gerrymandered districts, they want to maintain the unlevel playing field. As I've said before, AOC terrifies them because she's beating them at their own game. She's smart. She's a Latina woman from the Bronx who put herself through Boston College, who won scholarships, who is clearly brilliant, clearly a gifted orator, clearly has her pulse on the future in terms of progressive politics. She's an amazing woman. And that terrifies them. So what do they send in opposition of her? Marjorie Taylor Greene, a rabid dog, go yap at her ankles, go chase her down the hallway. She confronted her yesterday. She's or one of these days this week and was like, hey, why won't you debate me? Why won't you? And AOC just kept walking. But she's going to attack her. She's going to lose her stuff, and we're talking about somebody who already gave out a gun, who had a contest to give away an assault rifle in a state where just, 6 weeks ago, there was a mass shooting where somebody went on a racist, rampage and killed a bunch of Asian American women. Like we're at a really, we laugh about this, but we're at a scary place because this thing is becoming institutionalized. Trump was like this monster that split open and 1,000 little monsters crawled out of his belly and scattered into the shadows of this country. That's what you're dealing with. And you see it whenever these sort of surge trigger issues come about, like the Liz Cheney hearing this week. It was, they were all coming out from under the bed and trying to outdo each other in their racism. There was a couple guys from the South and there was the guy from Texas and, Chip Roy and all these people that were just like going out of their way to be more audaciously racist and to be more appealing to Trump. There was 2 different guys this week who said that the attacks on the Capitol on January 6th looked like normal tourist events to them. Right. That wasn't a normal tourist event. I worked on Capitol Hill. I saw the crowds and I saw the tours every day. The tours are high school kids, and people from home states coming to see. And it's a fun thing to interact with, actually, because people are interested in their democracy. That's not what happened on January 6th. They attacked the Capitol. And you have sitting congressmen or who are actively trying to rewrite history right in front of your eyes. It's like saying the Reichstag fire was just an accident. You know what I mean? Someone left a candle burning or something, So you have to be really watchful on what they're trying to do because we're one election cycle away from them taking back the House, and they're putting these laws in place so black folks and minorities don't have the power to do what they just did in this last election. That's what these things are about in Arizona and Georgia. They're about making sure that never happens again. And that the Christian white GOP racist white male and white woman get to decide who leads us. And the last time that happened, they had a 74-year-old drug addict in Pampers who took all his money from the Russians and brought his kids to work in the White House where they pilfered as much as they could, stole as much money as they could, brought in Steve Mnuchin and, like Wilbur Ross and all these guys that were clearly just trying to steal and scam, and a couple of the most blatant ones had to leave early, your Scott Pruitts, these guys had to leave early, but like the rest of them got a full 4 years of stuff in their faces, stuff in their pockets and riding off into the sunset. And now the next generation is coming in to do it.
Well, and somehow Ben Carson was able to, didn't he get through all 4 years without resigning? Point is, I remember that dining room set that he bought, off of the taxpayers' dime. Going back to your point that you were making about like representation in the Senate, there's frustration on when it comes to conservatives with like Washington, D.C. being a state, because that would allow the Democrats to have a more favorable advantage in the Senate. You have the same thing in California. With the amount of population in California, imagine if you had a North and South California, to represent the people. That would change things from, a legislative standpoint. And going back to your point about Marjorie Taylor Greene giving out guns, we would rather give out guns than vaccinations right now when it comes to the GOP. That's where they're at, and yet they're the pro-life party, to go back to my original point so far today. It's outrageous. Like, even if it benefits them, who's against infrastructure? Seriously, who's against infrastructure? But somehow this GOP is finding a way to be against it.
Absolutely. And they're being against it in their own home state. There was an inspector who found a crack in a bridge in Mississippi yesterday that was so big that when he found the crack, he radioed to his supervisors and said, "Get everybody off the bridge. Don't close the road and get everybody off the bridge." And I saw a picture of it. It was like the thing was broken in half. Like the main support steel beam had a crack straight through it. And that would have been a disaster. You would have seen a headline, 30 cars fall into the Mississippi River or wherever it is, And so the nation is crumbling, and they don't care because they want to grift and steal the money. And it's like you said, abortion. They passed a law in Texas just this week that said abortion is illegal after 6 weeks. Most women don't know they're pregnant before 6 weeks. Okay. 6 weeks is like nothing, it's insane. And they know that. The point of that is like basically abortion is now illegal. Nobody goes and gets a pregnancy test the day after they have sex. You know what I'm saying? Like it takes a while. It's a month when you have your period. You miss your period at 2 weeks after that, then you might get a pregnancy test. So 6 weeks is just in that window where you're just going to begin to think about it, and it's nobody's business. And they're, like you said, they're not going to feed these kids anyway. They want, no abortion, pro-life, but we don't want any education. We don't want any health care. We don't want any school lunch program. We don't want any after school. We don't want any preschool. They don't want anything. And that's what I'm always saying. It's these cynical old white men who get these like American rubes, for lack of a better term. And I like these people. I'm not trying to judge these people. For the people listening at home, you hear me rant on this all the time. Like I went to high school with a lot of these people. Not that I went to high school in a rural area, but I went to high school in a kind of working class, middle class area where people's dads were cops and firefighters and worked at IBM and stuff. They certainly weren't rich. They weren't too poor, but they were very white. And they were coming out of this Reagan era, and they bought this kind of love it or leave it ideology and this conservative thing that you spoke about at the top of the show, Jimmy, this pull them up by the bootstraps. That's a myth. Okay. The New Deal is what saved Americans and created the middle class. After World War II, it was the GI Bill that allowed a lot of these guys to come back from the war and go to college, and get skills that enabled them into the middle class. Unions were what allowed them to go to a factory and make enough money that they could have 3 kids, 2 cars in the garage, and a wife who stayed home based on a labor job, essentially, a skilled labor job in a factory. And that was wonderful. And it might have lasted had the Republicans not changed course, coming onto the Reagan times and saying, hey, they basically got a cartoon character in Reagan to come and be like, it's morning in America again, and there's pictures of him baling hay and stuff. He's a Hollywood actor who gets manicures. He wasn't a tough guy. He was an actor, and he was a racist actor, but he was able to sell people on this thing. And in the meantime, in the back door, all the Wall Street raiders are buying up these companies as quick as they can, all these factories, stripping them, and sending the products overseas and getting it made in China and all over Asia and Mexico and everywhere else, right? So they're rusting these cities at the same time that they're giving them this pablum that people buy, and they bought it. And, they were able to sell people this ideology of liberalism is bad, progressivism is bad. And it was very effective. It was very effective, and it became generational. And that's what Trump took advantage of. And the people that I went to high school with 30 years ago are now 50 years old and living in the suburbs and saying the same things like Cuomo's horrible, the taxes suck, the roads suck. Yeah, the roads suck because you don't want to pay taxes, because we're not already paying enough in tax. You know what I'm saying? Like, the whole taxes thing is insane, and I live in a part of the country where we pay a lot of taxes. I live in one of the highest tax places in all of the United States, and I have no problem with it. I know it's expensive, and I know people might think I'm rich. I'm not. But you pay your fair share. You didn't get anything for free in this country if you're a white middle-class male and woman. You didn't. You might think you did, but you didn't. And the myth that people sell is like, I never had slaves. That was something I heard as a kid all the time. Like, my grandfather came from Italy. We never had slaves. We never got, why are, it was this white working class, middle class resentment against the African-American community and minority communities. And it was BS. You got to hand up just by, you didn't get locked up, on your way to work, driving your car, like black guys do every time. You didn't get denied that job. You didn't get denied buying that house because of the color of your skin, but they did the entire time. And it elects somebody like Trump. He made a living off of that. Trump and his father would write a C down on applications if somebody was black, so they didn't rent it to him. He got sued by the Justice Department in the early 70s for doing that and lost, had to pay fines. They protected that sort of ideology of like, we're keeping this a white neighborhood, and that's apartheid. That's segregation. And that makes the whole of an organism much weaker, even though the people that propagate it think it makes it stronger and they think they're protecting something. They're living in ignorance and fear, and that only weakens the host eventually. And that's where we're at now. Now we're at sort of this rotted core of this husk of the American life, where people are arming up and turning against their fellow citizens and acting like they're in an army against the other. Trump militarized racism. And we have examples in history where other people did that, most recently where they make really excellent sauerkraut and sausages, a once beautiful country with a smart population, by the way. The Germans were a hell of a lot smarter than the Americans were at the time World War II happened, if you want to look at education and just how educated the average citizen was. And they quickly turned a blind eye, many of them, and went along with fascism. So these things are more dangerous than we think. And I think we're waking up a little bit to how much of a predicament we're still in.
Yeah, I don't think we're at DEFCON 1 when it comes to fascism in America, but I think we're at DEFCON 2. I mean, one thing that concerns me in my own community, the high school that I went to is about 90% white. Predominantly, upper middle class. A lot of money flows through this city. But if you were a person of color and you went to my high school, one of two things allowed that to happen. One, you were an athlete and your father was a coach more often than not. And this is just what I'm witnessing. I'm not speaking on anyone's behalf. This is just what I observed. Or your father had a privileged job. He was a cop, a firefighter, an administrator within the school. It's not a level playing field. There isn't equal access to education. And then when you have these Karens and Kevins who are offended by everything that isn't white, trying to limit the perspective that their kid can have, where they just want control over everything when it comes to their education, it adds to that fascism. And it's a deeply concerning thing that's happening all around the United States.
Absolutely. And it's happening at the county level. It's happening in all these school boards. They're not teaching evolution anymore. They're all up in arms against like critical race theory and all this kind of stuff. They're trying to indoctrinate people into the American way. As Trump, remember, he had all this project like the 1776 project or whatever it was going to be, right, in opposition to the 1619 project. I think I'm getting it right. The New York Times thing that was trying to educate people on slavery. And what is the American way? Because it's not what you're really being taught in school. When you put your hand, when I was in school, I don't know if they still do this, but you would put your hand over your heart and you would pledge allegiance to the flag every morning when, when class began. And even in third grade, I was like, this is creepy. Like, what am I pledging allegiance to? Like, I'm not a soldier. I got bussed here with the kids I lived in my neighborhood with would all happen to be Black or Latino or Middle Eastern. We got bussed in from a neighborhood where we don't have enough to eat half the time, and people come home from school every day and get evicted. So I don't know what we're pledging allegiance to, but our lives aren't so hot right now. And a lot of that is because of the policies of this nation. Right. But they were teaching you to pledge allegiance. And then they were like, Christopher Columbus was this wonderful man who came here and and it was like this guy was a genocidal maniac. He was a homicidal, like to the 10th degree, like seriously crazy. And he was looking for gold in the Caribbean. He didn't discover America, but you're sold these myths, and you're also sold like the founding fathers were these geniuses that invented like this form of democracy that never existed. And yeah, they did some good things, but they were basically like, men in their late 20s that also owned slaves and had sex with them all the time and stuff. You know what I mean? They wouldn't hold up today the way they do in these Mount Rushmore images we get of them. And I know people, they're all into that, but it's a myth. It's a cartoon. We want to feel the best about ourselves we can. And that's natural. And America's done some great things in the world. There's no question of that. And the reason that we have is because we were a people that came from all these other places. And that originally we shouldn't have done that, and we shouldn't have like displaced the Native Americans and murdered them and put them in camps and on reservations. We did. That's our original sin that we never acknowledge. What if you're a Native American child and they're telling you to stand up and pledge allegiance to the flag? That's not your nation. That's not your flag. Your nation was destroyed, by a bunch of white dudes with guns who came here, and gave you blankets with pestilence on it, like to try to destroy you and steal your land, and then brought in people from Africa to work that land and then got rich off it and sat back on the veranda and wrote a bunch of myths about how great a country we were. And that's the same thing they're trying to sell in these projects now. That's what it is. Let's re-up on that fantasy of America because the natives are getting restless, for lack of a better term. That's their response to wokeism. That's why being wokeism is like a bad term, just like they, turned liberalism into a bad term in the 80s. They're always in opposition of progress and culture and truth. Truth is the enemy of the GOP and the Republican mindset, the new Republican Christo-fascist, mindset.
Well, and the ironic thing is that if we drifted away from organized religion and more towards science, we would live longer and live healthier lives. Like part of the resistance in progress for human history is those that have their faith and are just dead set on it, like it's a cult. They take it to that extreme. You were talking about how like we're sold the American ideology. My favorite one is like capitalism. I was taught capitalism is about choice. You won't have a choice if it's socialism or communism. But you find out capitalism is about exploitation, whether it be resources, human labor. When you look at it, I'm looking around, fewer and fewer are benefiting, while more and more are suffering. And, another one that I learned about, didn't learn about it until college, was like Japanese internment camps. We did that after World War II. That happened, and we need to accept it so that it doesn't happen again.
Absolutely. And we were heading in that direction. If Trump got reelected, you definitely would have had internment camps. You basically had that at the border, but they would have gone one step further. You don't think Stephen Miller or some of those psychos, would have started like people are disappearing and we're not going to ask why, and we already don't know all the bad stuff that happened, down there at the border. And it's insane. It is, Lee Atwater was the guy in the 80s who really crafted a lot of this message for Bush and for Reagan. And he was sort of seen as a wunderkind of like, conservative ideology, and behind the scenes he was a freak, as all these guys are. They're always hypocrites, like your Roger Stone, who's guiding a lot of this MAGA-ism and a lot of this fascism. He's a total psychopath. He's a coke coked out like lunatic Batman villain, with a tattoo of Richard Nixon on his back. But he's good at and he started a company, with Paul Manafort and a guy named Black. It was Manafort, Stone, and Black, and they became a lobbying firm for overseas dictators, for Idi Amin and in the Philippines. Ferdinand Marcos was a client of theirs. These guys that were raping and pillaging their countries, for lack of a better term. But basically, that's what they were doing. They were taking all the money and killing people, and there was sanctions against them in this country. People like Jimmy Carter and stuff were, we had a history of standing up to this sort of thing internationally. And those guys formed a company in the 70s and said, hey, we can represent you in DC and get them to go a little easy on you. And that's what they did. That's how they began their political careers, was being a lobbying firm for dictators, for the worst of humanity, and helping the worst of humanity navigate the corridors of Washington power. And there became a lot of money in that. And what we saw in Trumpism was the Super Bowl of that. All these guys came out of the woodwork and they're like, this idiot's going to get elected. There's going to be no rules. We can literally do whatever we want. We can get Mike Flynn back into the government. We can have Eric Prince train people on his ranch in Wyoming to set up our enemies in DC, our political enemies. There was a story that broke yesterday that listeners may find similar to things I've told you about how Donald Trump does business, that he gets people in sexually compromised positions and then lords it over them and blackmails them, right? So a story broke yesterday in the Times that Eric Prince had run this operation against H.R. McMaster, who was Flynn's replacement, right, at the National Security Council, or whatever the title is, right? He was the guy that replaced Flynn, and he already had its haters because he was kind of a globalist. They thought he was a globalist. He was more middle of the road than the fascists they wanted in control, right? So they didn't like him. They're like, we got to take this guy out, right? But he was sort of beyond, he was a stand-up guy, so they didn't know what to do. So Eric Flynn had this operation where they train these people on a thing in Wyoming on his ranch. He's the Blackwater founder, in case people don't know. He's also the brother of Betsy DeVos, who was the worst thing, to happen to the education department, and who was so wealthy because their family's the Amway fortune that she had a yacht scheduler. She had so many yachts that she needed somebody to decide which one she was going to take out. And some of them are on the Great Lakes. Imagine being so rich, you got a yacht in Michigan. Just fucking fly to Nantucket. Take your yacht out on the ocean. What do you need a super yacht on the Great Lakes? And remind me to go on a rant about Elon Musk's new yacht, which he just purchased this week, which was $500 million. And has a trailer yacht, super yacht to follow it. When you talk about progress and not paying taxes, the guy who's probably putting more potholes on American roads than anyone else. Amazon trucks are 24/7 pounding the roads of America, and the dude's not paying a dime for upkeep, and he's buying a $500 million yacht. That's the reasons Russians had a revolution. You want to talk about how socialism and communism happens, keep it up and see what happens, But back to Eric Prince. So he was training these operatives, bringing in spies, and he brought M6 or whatever it is, British spies, and had all these, guys that were really good in this sort of international spycraft come in and train people to set people up. And they used honeypots, they use attractive women to set up guys, they find out where they're going to eat dinner. So somebody fed inside information to this woman that had been hired by, it's not ProPublica, it's the Project Veritas, I believe. They hired this woman, right? And she was fed this inside information that McMaster eats at this particular restaurant in DC. And then she went in there and tried to set him up. Sat next to him at the bar and hey, how you doing? Oh, you work for Trump? Yeah, he's a real scumbag, isn't he? They were trying to get him to talk smack about Trump, and he didn't fall for it. He never did. And then he left anyway, so the operation didn't happen. But that's what Trump did. That's Trump's playbook. It's not playing fair. It's not the level playing field, which seems to be the theme of this podcast. It's about using any sort of vice, any advantage I have to get the upper hand, so I can steal the most money and then I can crush my opponents. With Trump, it wasn't always about winning. He likes to talk about winning. He doesn't just want to win. He's already won. He inherited $700 million from his old man. Well, if I inherited $700 million, you would never hear from me again. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because $500 million would go to like every animal shelter in the country and homeless shelter and stuff. And the rest would go to feed like arts education for children or whatever, and then I'd take $2 million and go live on an island somewhere for the rest of my life. Like, I don't need that much money. And I could never enjoy a dime of it, knowing the amount of suffering that's happening in this world. And that's also part of our culture, is that we celebrate these guys. Elon Musk was hosting SNL last night. What has Elon Musk done for the people of America? Besides his running a scam on like Bitcoin and Dogecoin, which he tanked yesterday, by the way. He sent out
saw that coming.
Yep, we called that. He tanked it. And I told my buddies, like, you're not going to be a trillionaire. Don't spend the whole GameStop paycheck on Dogecoin, bro. You'll never get out of mom's basement if you do. And they're like, oh, you're a slave to, fungible banking, bro. Like, it's insane. But we celebrate that. Our great heroes in this country are, trillionaires and billionaires. And obviously that has some allure. Like, who doesn't want to have a bunch of Ferraris and stuff, But how much of that stuff do you need in opposition to people suffering? Because you can't enjoy it that much. Manhattan is, has the most concentrated wealth of probably anywhere in the world. And you walk out on the streets and people are sleeping everywhere now. You walk out of Fifth Avenue and, make a right onto 72nd Street. And there's going to be somebody, like, before you get to Madison, you're going to see somebody on the street who has nothing, who's carrying all their possessions in a bag, and haven't, had an opportunity to clean themselves up in a long time. I can't deal with that. That's not a healthy society. I don't care how much money I make. I can't look past something like that, because you're only here for a blink of an eye anyway. You think this is a long life. It ain't, as you lost your father young. It's like, we don't know how much time we have, and you can't take that money with you. But love never dies. Doing kind, esteemable acts never dies. And that's a currency that does transfer. That's worth more than Bitcoin or Dogecoin or whatever the hell it's called.
Well, and what's better than indulging on yourself? It's investing in other people and seeing them succeed. That is sustainable happiness. As happy as my dad was living in this world, he was also in pain every day, because he knew, I got everything I need. I have my family, I have my music, I have what I need to get through the day. But if I'm mad, how mad is somebody else that has nothing? That's part of the frustration for me. I'm comfortable, I'm good, and I'll figure it out. I'm smart enough and have the resources, the support system to get to where I want to go. What about for the person that doesn't have that? That didn't have two great parents growing up, that didn't have the education that I did. Let's use the privilege that we have to build a better America for everybody else around us. And then we'll be thanked for it. That's the entire ideology. It's going to help everybody. I'm a holistic problem solver. And at this point, we need that kind of approach.
Absolutely, man. Well said, Jimmy. And I learned from Oprah, like, the fastest way to make your dreams come true is to help somebody else's dream come true.
Yeah.
And I got to work with her a couple of times. I worked with her in the 90s. And then again in probably it was 2010. And it was the 10th anniversary of O Magazine. And she did a one-woman show. She was doing a one-woman show at Radio City Music Hall. I got to be a part of it behind the scenes, working with the talent. And she was directed by George C. Wolfe. And after we did this rehearsal, we went out, we went into the house. I got to sit near George, and she got on stage and did kind of a monologue. And it was a storytelling from her life. It was a story. And it was about when she had been up for the role of Harpo in A Color Purple, which was a Steven Spielberg directed, like, wonderful Oscar-winning thing for which she won an Oscar, and it made her, an international sensation. Before that, she was a local host in Chicago, and Quincy Jones had seen her on the local news and called up Spielberg and said, I found Harpo, I found this character that they'd been having a hard time casting. It was just one of those God moments where he happened to turn on the TV in his hotel room and saw her local morning talk show and was like, that's our person, right? Yeah. So Oprah gets this audition, flies to Hollywood and gets to audition for Steven Spielberg. Like, can you imagine what that would be like? I couldn't handle that pressure. I would be like, oh, I would mess it up, right? But she got to do it. And when she came back, she didn't hear anything for a while. And then she heard that another, sort of famous actress was up for the same role. And she goes, well, that's it. I'm not going to get the part, obviously. They're going to give it to such and such. And she had felt bad about her weight. So she checked into like she said, maybe it's because of my weight or whatever, it was sort of making her feel bad about herself. So she checked into like not a rehab isn't the right term, but like a spa or, a place where you go stay and work on your health. Right. And try to lose weight. So she went to this thing and she was on a jogging track. They made them go out on a jogging track every day, as part of the routine. And she's out there on the jogging track and she's thinking about like this role that she wants so bad, which is like an attachment, from a spiritual point of view. When you attach yourself to desire, you're going to suffer. That's what the Buddha taught us. Like attachment is the root of all suffering. Desiring, thinking if I get this other thing, it's going to make me whole, will only cause suffering. It's an illusion because you think it'll make you happy. And sometimes you get a temporary burst of excitement from it, but that's not true happiness. True happiness is found within and in helping others, as you just said, right? But so she's got this attachment and she kind of knows better and she's struggling with this stuff as she's jogging around the track. And then finally it hits her like an epiphany. She goes, you know what? If I'm not meant to have this part, let me not have this part. Let this other actress get this part. And she meant it, and she said, if this actress gets this part, let her be the greatest Harpo that's ever existed. Let her just like totally do an amazing job. And she let it go. And at the second she let it go and had that revelation, somebody comes running out from like the office and they're like, Miss Winfrey, there's a phone call for you, right? And she gets off the track and goes down into the office, picks up the phone. And the guy goes, hello, this is Steven Spielberg. I heard you're at a fat camp. I need you to not lose any more weight because you're playing Harpo in The Color Purple. Boom. So the moment she let it go was the moment the universe gave her what she wanted most, Yeah. And that's a hard lesson to learn, but it's like she wanted what was best for somebody else. And then she got what was best for her and everybody else, And it's hard to come to those realizations when you're chasing things all the time, and we're in a culture where we're taught to like look down on the countries that don't have a lot of stuff, and you go to like, Papua New Guinea or some of these places and the people are a lot happier. You look at, go watch some videos and stuff and you see kids running around with smiles on their face. You see people respecting each other and their elders and living together, several generations living together and sort of being tied to their traditions, And, Joseph Campbell speaks about this stuff too, the culture and the power of myth and stuff. We've lost a lot of that. Our myths are now trillionaires, like Elon Musk is trying to become a hero and he is to these kids, and yeah, it's cool. You made a fast electric car, that doesn't have a spare tire and sometimes blows up, like, all right, you're a hero, buddy, and you wouldn't put on a mask, and you influenced a bunch of other people to not put on a mask. We're in a country where 40-year-old men will put on a Spider-Man costume and go to Comic-Con, right? But they won't put on a mask and walk into CVS.
We have a country where people are filling plastic bags full of gasoline as if that's, more environmentally conscious, like I saw a meme today that said it was talking about when you were a kid and you have a pizza party. You have kids who grab 3 pieces because they're worried that there's not going to be enough. And then you have kids who grab 1 piece because they want to make sure that everybody gets one. Like we have to shift our ideology away, less me, more we. Like that's the best way to summarize it. You know, you want to find happiness, try to build a community where everyone is able to, you know, pursue their ambitions, at least have a shot at pursuing their ambitions. Because if you don't create that kind of movement for those around you, it's not going to happen for yourself either.
Absolutely. And you're in a richer world when everybody gets to live to their full potential and go after their dreams. You know, that's one of the constant themes I talk about all the time. It's like scales on a fish, man. If the sun hits it right, it makes a rainbow. You know, it's this beautiful thing. And everybody has a role in that, you know, and that's part of the tragedy of what's happening now is that they're sort of indoctrinating generations into this hate, and they're spending all their time hating the other. And, you know, folks on the left, you know, folks like me or whatever that, you know, would normally be pursuing more creative things or spending all our time just being like, hey, look what's happening. You know, like I know it's by choice, but I feel obligated. Like Michael Moore, I was at an event with Michael Moore a couple years ago, documentary, Critics' Choice Documentary Awards that I do every year. And he said, look, if you're an artist, you're a writer, you're a filmmaker, like that other project you're working on, put it aside for now. You know, there'll be time for that down the road. If you have a skill, put it in service of defeating Trump and Trumpism, or there's nothing on the other side of this. You know, and I feel the same way. You know, it's like it's not over yet. We have to see this thing out and really make sure we establish who we are and shine a light on this injustice. Otherwise, you know, it's going to snowball and people are going to suffer, and there's going to be some of that ahead anyway. You know, but like you said, the GOP, you know, it's now all about, you know, greed is good. You know, that was the 80s GOP. The old GOP was not that way. Greenwich, Connecticut is one of the most conservative areas. That's where the Bushes come from. You know, their father was Prescott Bush. He was a senator from Connecticut. That's kind of the bastion of old waspy white males and money, right? Mm-hmm. And back in the day, in the 60s and 70s, if you were a CEO of a company, because all those guys were like CEOs on Wall Street and, you know, New York companies, advertising companies and all this stuff, and they would live in Greenwich, which is a very fancy suburb of New York City, right? And back then, like, you would make, you know, 200 times what your lowest amount, you know, employee did. Now it's like 2,000 times. You know, the CEO makes 80 million, you know, and the lowest employee makes 40,000. It used to be like you weren't that the golf, you know, you would make sure everybody got to a minimum. You know, that was the whole thing. You worked for this company, you gave your life to it, like we took care of you. That became obsolete. But those guys, you know, in Greenwich in particular, it was all about looking over your hedgerows at your neighbors kind of thing. Nobody had like really big bushes or walls on their properties. They all kind of saw each other. All these CEOs, there would be a contest where they would sort of outdo each other to see who could wear the more modest watch, right? They would wear Timexes and things, you know, Seikos or whatever. You know, it wasn't like, give me the blingiest Rolex, you know, Patek Philippe thing that it is now. Now they have like everybody buys a house there, all these hedge fund guys, and they put the big walls around them. They call them Greenwich walls now. You know, they put these big wooden fences around their property so you can't see in. You can't see who lives there. You know, there was a shift in thinking like, I'm going to get as much as I can for myself. I'm going to cut myself off from the community, and I'm just going to like conspicuously consume as much as I can. And I bring up George H.W. Bush, right? George Bush's dad. His nickname at the Greenwich Country Club and when he was in prep school was Have Half. Have Half. Because somebody would say, you know, hey, George, that looks like a nice sandwich. And he'd go, Have Half. That was his initial, you know, instinct was have half. And that guy, you know, he grew up as conservative and as wealthy as it gets in this country. But there was an ingrained attitude of you don't flaunt it. My grandmother, paternal grandmother, Casler, Rosemary Casler, was a Reynolds. She was from a very wealthy family when she was a kid. And when I was like 18, I was staying with her in the summer for a while. And I'd bought these sunglasses, these $150 sunglasses, these Revo sunglasses, you know, and I didn't have any money. I was an 18-year-old kid. $150 was a lot of money to spend on sunglasses in 1989. You know, it still is. But then it was just like ridiculous. And we were talking one day and I said, yeah, I bought these sunglasses. They were $150 because I came from nothing. Even though my grandma was rich, I lived with my mom. I didn't have a lot of wealth when I was a kid, and you become very label conscious. It was the 80s. It was about blingy stuff and trying to get this expensive labels, So I bought them because I was into skiing and I thought I'd look really cool. And she was like, that's ridiculous. And she's like, I grew up with money and we didn't flaunt it. She was very old money. She went, was educated in Manhattan, and her family had a limo, and she would make the limo drop her off like 2 blocks away and like walk to school so the other kids didn't resent her and stuff, which was kind of a weird analogy. I was like, you still got it going on, but I got the point. Old money wasp, like you didn't get these big giant McMansions. A decent looking house was enough. Now these people get a 70,000 square foot home. Like, what do you need that for? Not to mention the environmental footprint of heating and cooling a house like that, because houses are like boats or cars. They use energy. They're actually bigger polluters than a lot of them, especially buildings in Manhattan. People don't talk about that much. But and by the way, Trump was the biggest offender of the environmental laws for his buildings in New York City. They put in these laws where they had to put these clean scrubbers, on the diesel fuel, which is what you heat, home heating oil, so they scrub this waste, and Trump would never participate in that. And they would just rack up the fines. Like they didn't even care, So it all goes back to that conspicuous consumption, and that's become a disease in our culture. That's become a really dangerous thing. And it ties into like people rushing out to buy all this gas. First of all, you shouldn't be driving a car that gets 12 miles to the gallon now. Like, we're the assholes that have been doing that for 30 years. In Europe, they've been paying $5 a gas, a gallon for gas since the 80s, and they drive tiny cars because they don't need to use all this stuff. And it's not like, well, we can use as much as we want. The whole world suffers. When you pollute the world, the whole world suffers. There's only a finite amount of these limited resources, and we're using more than our fair share and flaunting it. And we're not doing our part as a people. And that was always kind of us doing that and it affecting the rest of the world. Now it's us doing that and it's affecting our neighbors here at home.
Right. Well, and, we've talked about American imperialism on this show before. One of the issues with capitalism and the way that system works, it's an exploitation of resources. It's one of the reasons why we're in the Middle East, is so that we can extract, the fuel that we need to fuel this American ideology. And you were talking about like old money and how they don't really brag about their wealth. One of the most telling speeches in 2016 before Trump got elected was Michael Bloomberg, who you're well aware of, being from New York. He talked about how smart people don't have to say they're smart. They just are, like Trump says he's smart. I use the best words. He says that because he wants to be validated, instead of just using them, he has to brag about how great his words are. That's the difference. That's the difference between confidence and being an arrogant asshole. I think we need to get back to humbling ourselves, aspire to intelligence. Don't be belittled by it, Yeah,
I know. Well, and ignorance became a selling point of the whole MAGA movement. They celebrated idiocy, and conspicuous consumption has always been Trump's thing. Like they say, he's the poor guy's idea of what a rich guy is. The gold flake and all the ridiculous like stuff is horrible. If you ever see pictures of his house, it's horrible. And it was all an illusion. His office was threadbare. When they started making The Apprentice, they had to rent the furniture for the Trump organization because what they had in there was so junky. The whole thing was like a mom and pop shop that was like a grift on the outside world. Then he'd call up the New York Times and be like, look at my opulent penthouse that I live in, which was a cheaply constructed building. He'd buy cheap marble, like everything was gold flake. It was nothing is real. He gave Roy Cohn a fake watch. The only thing he'd ever given Roy, he never paid him for all the stuff, all the years. And at the end, he gave him a fake Rolex, on his deathbed. He didn't even go see him,
He would call tabloids as John Barron and like tout, his wealth, which was a myth,
Look, real wealthy people don't want you knowing how much money they have. I live in a town that, and in a county that has a lot of really wealthy people. There's 5 or 6 billionaires in the town I live in. Those guys don't want you knowing where they live, and they don't want you knowing how much money they have. Even guys like Bloomberg, who obviously is a billionaire or whatever, like, part of it is out of decorum, and part of it is like you really got it like that. You don't want everybody knowing that you got it like that, because all they do is ask you for it. But it's again, it's a disease and a sickness, But we're coming up on the end of the show. It's another week. We got our nice T-shirts on. Our viewers at home can't see that, but I'm wearing a Noel Casler podcast T-shirt. What are you wearing, Kev Mo?
I got one for Kev Mo. It was his masking shirt, and it's got on the bottom here. If you can read this, you're standing too close. So it enabled the social distancing thing, and he's written songs like "Put a Woman in Charge." He's a very progressive artist and big fan of Kev Mo. So.
Kev's a man. He just played City Winery here in New York City last week. It was good to see him out there again. I follow him on Instagram. I've done a lot of gigs with him. I just did a gig with him and Cyndi Lauper not long ago.
Oh, cool.
2016. My favorite Kev Mo story is we were doing a benefit for sort of like an end to gun violence after the horrible shooting involving Gabby Giffords, where too many people were killed that day. And we went out to Tucson, Arizona to do this big, progressive fundraiser right afterwards. It was the beginning of March. It was right before the tsunami in Japan. And we had Crosby, Stills and Nash and Jackson Brown and Nils Lofgren, all these great guys, and Kev Mo. And I was on tour with Jackson as his road manager. And we were doing a show in Thousand Oaks and on a Friday night, and the gig was Saturday night in Tucson, right? And so we were like, all right, we're going to pick up Kev Mo. He's doing a gig at this club outside of LA. We're going to pick him up on the way to Tucson, and we get on the tour bus, and I just hopped on the leg of a tour. So I didn't have a bunk on that bed. I was doing like a one off, and then we were taking a break. And Kev didn't have a thing. So we leave the gig with Jackson. We drive a couple hours and pick him up. It might've been San Diego or something. We pick him up. And it's like an overnight drive to Tucson. It's a long drive to Tucson from LA. So he and I both couldn't go to sleep. Everybody else went to sleep. And we sat up in the front of the bus and ate cereal and talked about blues all night and stuff. And it was just awesome. He's such a cool guy. And he'd always be like, hey, I ain't mad at you. That's what he'd always say. He'd be like, hey, I'm dating this girl. I ain't mad at you. And he's a guitar freak. I mean, he's obviously one of the great guitar players, but, he's also loves gear and guitars and stuff. And I just saw him playing a PRS guitar, which is a guitar I play a lot. And very cool guy. Great carrier of the blues. Just a guy who's really carrying the traditions of blues forward and very progressive. And he has this woman he writes songs with. She lives in Colorado. I got to meet her too. He writes as part of a team. And just incredible dude. I didn't mean to spend the last few minutes of the podcast talking about Kev Mo, but Kev Mo's a good dude, so he's worthy of it. What else? What else did we miss?
That's just about everything. I was gonna say that Kev Mo, he's straight out of Compton.
Yeah.
You're gonna be a guy that has quite an experience coming out of a place like that, and. Again, I'm a big fan of his music. You can tell he's a guy that feels what he plays. You can feel the energy when he's playing, at least in my analysis of his music. But it's been a good show so far. Yeah,
thanks for listening, everybody. This is episode 11. And another week in the books. I'm just trying to think if we missed anything crazy that's going on. There's so much going on. Liz Cheney got ousted, right? We covered that. Elise Stefanik is now the number 3 in charge. Another troll, who knows better, who went to Harvard, who was against Trump in the beginning. She was against the Muslim ban and all this kind of stuff. And then, read the tea leaves and said, the only way is throwing in with this party. So she did it. We're not out of the woods yet, folks. Some things are coming down. There's going to be a Matt Gaetz indictment soon. There just has to be. So that's something to look forward to. The SDNY replaced the corruption prosecutor who had brought the case against Giuliani this week. He cashed in and went to a white shoe law firm, as they do. The SDNY is a reputable place, and it always has its defenders, its ex-DNY guys come out and get you sound bites ahead of any kind of scandal like that. But bottom line is they go there to train how to defend, criminals, wealthy criminals, because they prosecute the poorer people, and a few examples of wealthy people. And then they cash in and go to firms where guys pay them to go, hey, make sure that doesn't happen to me. When they come to indict me, tell me what they're going to do. Let me use your expertise to, defend myself. And that's what this guy did. Now he's going to a big firm that defends corrupt criminals. Wealthy criminals. And that's the scam. That's the two Americas. There's two systems of justice in this America. So don't hold your breath, but hopefully there will be something coming for Giuliani. And by no means am I implying that the investigation is over. I know it's continuing. They promoted a woman in this guy's place, so it's probably a good thing in the end. But bear in mind, there's other people in New York City who've done things with Rudy Giuliani, who've done things like Trump. You don't put up buildings in New York City and not get involved with a certain amount of corruption and malfeasance. It's just the nature of the beast. It's a city that's at best very sympathetic to corruption and a certain way of doing business, that sort of benefits those with money and power that happen to be white. So that's where we're at. Enough of my rap. Hope you guys all have a great week. Jimmy, thanks for joining me once again. We look forward to next week, and thanks everybody for making this a successful podcast. We'll talk to you soon. Be well.